my name is Floriane Fidegnon. I'm a co-lead for the Tech Ethics Advisory Group. And essentially, Tech Ethics is an institute-wide initiative led by IEEE Technical Activities. We strive to drive balanced conversation on ethical and societal implications of technology. And we look to serve as a global trusted brand for all things related to technology ethics. My background's in manufacturing engineering. I've worked quite a bit on public sector innovation. I currently work within defence and national security, looking at innovation, and advise some other more UK, Europe-based institutes around their policy work, and also the British Standards Institute on AI standards. I'm really pleased to be joined by Breeze Liu. Breeze is the founder and CEO of Alecto AI, a technology company dedicated to combating image-based sexual violence. She's also a survivor herself, and she will give a much more in-depth introduction to her background and her expertise in a moment. What we wanted to do is keep the session interactive. And again, thank you in advance for participating. So just a quick icebreaker question to see where everyone has travelled in from for those in the room, and then for those online, where are you joining us from today? Breeze, you've travelled quite far, actually, haven't you?
Yeah. San Francisco. San Francisco.
Also,
Yeah.
I travelled in from London yesterday, got New York, New Jersey. Awesome, thank you everyone. So the first official question is just to get a bit of a sense in the room. How well do you understand the ethical challenges surrounding deepfakes and generative AI? And there's a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is little to no understanding, and 5 is full understanding. And I'll give a minute just to consider that. This will be really useful for us as Breeze and I talk, just to understand where everyone is in the room. Okay. Have some understanding. Thank you. Yes. Always best to sit on the side. Of course, I don't know what I don't know. I'm sure there's much I don't know about this topic. Excellent. Thank you. Great engaged room. So a little bit of a test here for you. So McAfee conducted a report last year, and they were looking at the percentage of people who are able to tell the difference between a deep fake voice and a real one. So it would be great for you to all guess what percentage of people are unable to tell the difference between a deep fake voice and a real one. You might be surprised by the answer. Unable, yes. What percentage were unable to tell the difference? Okay, pretty high estimations there. Two more seconds. It's quite an even distribution. The correct answer is 70%, which I think is pretty astonishing when you think about how new the technology is. But actually, to the point from the previous panel, it really isn't about the sophistication of the models, but how well it's able to convey its initial message. Here we go. So in 2024, an Arab employee fell victim to a deepfake fraud. How much was the company defrauded by? Have an absolute guess? We've got a couple of answers. Excellent. Yes. So there's a couple of articles online, but really this was to show that this isn't just at a personal, individual level, but actually there's some considerations for corporates as well, the risk to their business and their security. The employee was duped by a deepfake, pretending to be one of the senior leaders, executives of that division, and the company was defrauded by £200 million. Hong Kong dollars. What percentage of online deepfakes depicted pornographic material? We've got a couple of guesses. Thank you, everyone. So according to a Security Hero report, a cybersecurity specialist, in their 2023 State of Deep Tech analysis, they found that 98% of deepfakes online contain pornographic material. And I think for this session, we'll reframe that slightly and think about AI-generated non-consensual intimate imagery. So thank you all for that initial polling. There'll be a couple more questions towards the end of the session, and then an opportunity for some audience Q&A. But I really wanted to come back to Breeze and have a bit more of an in-depth conversation. Because Breeze, you have a really interesting background in history. I think there's a lot that we can learn from you in terms of your experience and what you're trying to do to provide a solution that doesn't yet exist. So my very, very first question, apologies, before we start, just to give a quick insight, I think it's necessary for us to have an open and honest conversation, particularly around this topic. But we must recognise that realities of this area is really challenging. So we'll be touching on themes around suicide, sexual abuse, non-consensual intimate imagery. Please feel free to look after yourself during this conversation at any point if you need to leave. Just to give you fair warning, because I think it's important that we don't censor the conversation and allow these myself to go into the depths of that. So with that out the way, Breeze, would you give a bit of an introduction to you, yourself, and your experience to date?
Okay, thank you so much, Floriane, for having me, and thank you so much for this platform. My name is Breeze Liu. I am a survivor of so-called deepfake porn, and I am also the founder and CEO of Alecto AI. So for those of you who read the New York Times, you're probably familiar with Nicholas Kristof, who is arguably the most influential journalist of our time. So I was the one who educated Nick Kristof on the issue of deepfake. And Nick and we worked on the story together, and then it came out this April. And then from then on, I was recognized by the mainstream media as the leading activist on this issue on deepfake porn. And but before, like, I was victimized, I had a very, my career and my professional background and my academia background was actually quite interesting. I went to UC Berkeley, majored in peace and conflict studies. And when I was at UC Berkeley, I wrote the Wikipedia page on how Islamic State weaponized social media platforms to spread their extremist agenda. And jokes on me, a few years later, I became the victim of weaponized technology myself. And before I founded my own company, I was a venture capitalist investing in early stage startups. And my first job in the tech industry was actually on trust and safety on big tech. I was working on anti-hate speech and anti-terrorism. And so it's all like very interesting how it got to this point. And then when I first became a victim of this, it was extremely devastating. I so in 2020 in April 2020, I received a Facebook message from my college friend, and he said, "You need to drop everything that you're doing and get on a phone call with me right now." I called him, and he said, "I don't want you to panic, but there's a video of you circulating on Pornhub." So when I first heard about this, I was like, that is not true. That is a joke because I have never even visited Pornhub. How could this be me? I'm well educated. I work in the tech industry. This is not me. This is not happening. This is not funny. And he said, "I am not joking. I am sending you the link. You have to look." He sent me the link, and and I saw my own face on the thumbnail of a pornographic video. And that was like the beginning of my journey. So at first I thought, okay, how difficult could it be for me to seek justice, right? Because in this country we have the rule of law, and so I went to the police. And so although I tried to really did my best to establish myself as a human being in front of law enforcement, I was slut shamed. So I mean, so keep in mind, I mean, I worked in trust and safety at big tech, and I was a venture capitalist. I have a good job, and I mean, I'm well educated, but none of that matters. The police, the first question they asked me, it was, have you ever engaged in prostitution? Do you ever exchange money for sexual images or videos of yourself? And I was completely, I mean, there's really no words strong enough to describe how I was feeling at the time. And so, I mean, after a long struggle, I mean, it literally feels like every door was like, I mean, was shut. So I decided to create my own solution, which is Alecto AI. So I realized that this is a tech-enabled problem and it requires tech-enabled solution. That's why I decided to found this company. And I still remember like the day that I decided to create this company is like the moment when I realized that unless I change the system, unless I change the world, justice wouldn't even be an option for me. That's why I decided to engage in social movement and then raising awareness, advocacy. So currently there are several legislation they're working on in Congress. I mean, some of them are actually bipartisan. So, I mean, and like, I can't say like exactly which which one of them are, but I'm behind some of those legislations myself. And then yeah, so I will leave it there, and then there's more to unfold.
Thank you, Breeze. What I find really interesting is that you have seen almost all sides of the story. You've been a VC, so involved in kind of the tech world. You've been in academia. You've been a survivor yourself, and now you are a founder. It'd be really interesting to understand from your perspective and your experience, how can all these stakeholders work together more effectively to safeguard and better protect the victims of these types of crimes?
Yeah. So first of all, like, one issue that I noticed is that so this is a huge problem, online image abuse or deepfake abuse. So 98% of the deepfake are pornographic and 99% target women. And according to another global research, there are at least 600 million people currently impacted by online image abuse, such as so-called revenge porn or fake profile, all of that. And one third of them have considered committing suicide. So, I mean, we could see that this is a huge problem, and there we have so many victims globally. But oftentimes, when it comes to creating a solution, the victims are oftentimes excluded from the conversation, and they're not part of the solution, which I think is a huge problem, because you cannot create a solution just by your imagination.
We're talking about stakeholders and how stakeholders can better engage. And you talked a little bit about some of the work you're doing at kind of, I suppose you could say congressional levels, so kind of at the very highest levels within the US, and then also what you're doing with your organization. Um, could you talk a little bit more about the safeguarding of survivors and victims, especially given your experience? What should be better, and what can those organizations responsible do for survivors and victims?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I can speak from my own, like just my personal experience, like, and how hard it is. So, when I went to the police, they didn't do anything. And this level of like lack of deterrence and lack of action from law enforcement made the perpetrator realize that there is nothing to stop him. So, and my action to seek justice did not bring me peace, but instead it provoked the perpetrator. And he then decided to create 800 deepfake porn of me and spread it that all over the internet. And so this is like, that's like, I'm the living proof of like, a broken system. So clearly legislation that needs to catch up, and also law enforcement, we really need to provide more training. And we all know that what happens on the internet, it doesn't just stop in one place. It will quickly proliferate really just everywhere. So I think like it's really important when you when you did find this harmful content, we need to suppress it immediately. So I'll tell you about my journey to remove those hundreds of non-consensual URLs of me on the internet. As it turns out, I there were 142 URLs. Actually, they were actively hosted on Microsoft Azure's server. That's a very big company, and that they refused to remove. So I have an organization funded by the French government actually helping me, representing me on my behalf, contacting these platforms because as a victim, it's impossible for me to mentally handle the idea of dealing with all of that content. And so that organization is actually, as I mentioned, funded by the French government, and they're a trusted flagger by Microsoft. So they already have that relationship with Microsoft. And when they contacted Microsoft demanding the removal of my content with my passport information and everything, Microsoft was like, no, we don't know for sure if that's her. And they also said that they don't have the technology to do so, which is absolutely ridiculous because as someone who worked in trust and safety and worked in tech, I can tell you that big tech companies have a lot of technologies. Yeah. And so clearly that's another broken part over there. And then so about me is that I was invited to meet President Biden at the White House last year when he signed the AI regulation executive order. And I reported these 800 URLs after I've met the president. And that gives you an idea of how difficult it is to seek justice. So I am well educated, I'm resourceful, and I have met the president of the United States. And if it's this hard for me to get those removed, think about how is it even remotely possible for any teenagers who have been abused to get their content down, right? So I think we there's so much more work that we need to do and so much broken pieces that we need to mend.
Absolutely. And it struck me there that you're talking about really large organizations who have the resource to put towards a technology capability. And you mentioned earlier that this is technology-enabled problem, therefore there must be a technology-enabled solution. Just to talk a little bit about Alecto AI, because you've mentioned that you're creating a solution that doesn't exist yet. How does Alecto AI provide that support? How does it do some of the work that perhaps some of the big tech companies are not doing at the moment?
Yeah, so it's very simple. Like the way I see this is broken is how do you get more individuals involved? Because eventually it's us, right? Who cares the most about our own abuse, about our own content not being out there. So what we do is we connect individuals and platforms together. And Alecto AI is the trusted third party authentication layer. So we use facial recognition to actually scan the internet and also all the platforms' data. And obviously, through lawful access, we we don't do anything non-consensually. And so we would ask the individuals to upload 2 selfies of themselves, and after they're verified, the system would create a token of their face, which will be used to compare with all the images in our database that we have. And through a reverse image search process, we will show them the result of that's related to their face. And if something is infringing or something seems wrong, we help them to report. Just one button, you press one button and click all the content you wanted to report. We help you to report across different multiple platforms. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So in that way, we will minimize the re-traumatization of victims, and that way, I do believe it could save lives.
Absolutely, I'd agree with that. And I think what would be good to move on to is we've talked a little bit about, well, how do you navigate the challenges and what are some of the ethical considerations? And you're talking here a little bit more about removal and harm reduction. What is your experience or kind of understanding of what needs to be done in terms of detection of this type of material, content moderation, some of the challenges that you've seen and experienced in that space?
So I think the biggest challenge is in terms of the value. So when we think about a platform so first of all, although Microsoft did abuse me, that is a fact. But I do believe they have there are good people in the big tech companies. And I so we need to find okay, what is broken here? And there are people who wanted to take action, but somehow they can't take action because maybe there isn't enough valuable information or evidence for them to take action on. So how do we fix that? And more importantly, how do we prioritize the most urgent situation? Like if someone's house is on fire or someone is about to commit suicide, you need to get to that quick so that the tragedy doesn't happen. And what we're trying to do with Alecto AI is that if you make a report through Alecto AI, because we already authenticated your your identity. So I mean, you don't need to second guess okay, if this is a real report or fake report. All the platform needed to do is to just okay, to remove that. And for with that, it really saves them a lot of time in terms of logistics, and also helps them to take action quickly. Because if you have ever tried to make a report on Meta or Twitter or now it's called X or TikTok, whatever, right? I mean, oftentimes they don't ever get back to you. Or even if they did, 3 months later, I mean, those abusive content might have already proliferated,
Yep.
right? So I mean, so time is very important. We need to make sure that the platform take the right action at the right time, and so that we can save lives.
Thank you. And I think that's a really good point in terms of time and volume. And there's only so much you can do from a human or human powered perspective. And obviously, your organization is using technology. Um, but we must be aware of kind of the ethical challenges around using AI itself to almost regulate itself. What I wanted to kind of understand from your perspective then is what should those organizations be doing better? So you've mentioned a couple of the digital platforms. Is it that they need to be collaborating with organizations like yours better? Is it that they need to be doing more work within law enforcement? We heard from the previous panel some of the work and teams that Meta has that looks at these areas. But I guess almost a little bit of a retrospective. What could have been done differently so that your experience wasn't what it was, essentially?
Yeah. So first of all, this is a systemic problem, and it requires systemic solution. So, but I mean, but if I wanted to say one thing that applies to all these different sectors is that stop blaming the victims and stop justifying the abuse. And it seems really simple, right? But in practice, it's a lot more complicated. But I mean, first of all, when I first found out about my abuse, it's on Pornhub, and that is a porn site that it's not very obviously. I mean, you can imagine the intersection wisdom was not very pleasant, and I had to sue them eventually.
Yep.
So I mean, if but the thing is if the platforms are more socially responsible, then maybe it doesn't have to come to this point that, I mean, they face class action lawsuit, which could result in billions of dollars in losses. And they could also face federal fines. So Meta was actually fined $5 billion by the federal government for privacy violations. So I think even though they sometimes view the trust and safety team as a cost center, but I think it's a small price to pay comparing with all the billions of dollars you will have to pay in terms of federal fines and class action lawsuits. So I mean, we need to really think ahead and then be more responsible, and yeah, and just to think about be more empathetic about people's experiences, because this is a real problem and it really kills people.
Absolutely. And I think that the last question I wanted to ask you before we go to sort of audience Q&A is the point you made earlier that it was a French and English organization that helped you to essentially identify those 800 URLs. And you've talked a lot about kind of your experience here because of how it works in the US and some of the policy and laws that or regulation that exists here that might be differing cross border, considering that uh, Electo AI operates not just in the UK but kind of beyond. How can that cross border collaboration be done more effectively?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So first of all, we all need to understand the internet has no border. even though jurisdiction has a lot of borders, right? I mean, in this country, different states have different laws, which is kind of chaotic sometimes. But yeah, so I mean, what happens on the internet doesn't just stay in one county or one state, right? I mean, it just goes everywhere. Look at what happened to me. Some of my content are still on Russian server that I don't even know how to get them removed. I do, right? So I mean, so first of all, I think like, all the big tech platforms, they are actually like, they are global. So I mean, to really like, connect with them, that means like we have a huge advantage of suppressing some of these issues. And also like, we need to like engage with the global regulators more often so that, we make sure that, this is a collaborative effort.
Sorry, ladies, the owl picks up quite a bit of background noise. I know you're passionate about this conversation and you're discussing it, but please give us a moment for audience Q&A. Thank you, Breeze. I think that's um perhaps potentially an insurmountable challenge given the kind of political actors that we're talking about and the scale of the problem. We're not going to jump back to the mentee because I do not want to risk our tenuous IT balance. But what I would like to do is open up the floor to audience Q&A, both online, if you'd like to type your questions in the chat, and then for those in the room, if you just would like to raise your hand, and then Mark kindly will have a roaming mic. Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, my name's David Medas. I have a couple questions. One is about the trusted flagger you mentioned in France. What was the difference between what happened with the trusted flagger, which was unsuccessful, and what you've done, which seems to have worked?
Just to clarify the question, you want to understand how the organization in France supported Breeze differently to what was done here, law enforcement here?
No, different from what is the trusted flagger in France did. What Breeze has done is different from what the trusted flagger in France did when she went to the trusted flagger.
Okay, I don't think that's different though. If they're talking about Alecto AI in terms of what you guys do, how is that perhaps different to some of the detection tools that, let's say, some of the big tech giants have?
Yeah, so we're actually detection, removal, and deterrence all together. We're the one-stop solution, and the French organization is funded by the French government, but they don't. I don't think they do any detection. They only do removal. So I mean, the organizations are kind of scattered all over the world, and they only cover like the French. They're only supposed to cover the French citizen thing, but I mean, when they saw like what happened to me, and they realized, oh my gosh, an activist like you, like, you can't even get help. Like, we need to, so I mean, they kind of just like helped me out of the goodness of their heart. But yeah, but usually like, how it works is like they only support their own country. But electorally, I supports people globally.
Yeah, excellent. You had another question?
It's about you said there's some legislation before Congress on this issue. Well, what does the legislation propose to do?
So there are like different parts of the legislation. Some of them only cover authentic content abuse, like non-consensual or intimate images. Some of them like cover synthetic images abuse, like deepfake. So I mean like a lot of them like actually demands like removal within like a certain amount of time, either 48 hours, 72 hours from the platforms. And also, I mean, I do believe like the federal law, some like they try to criminalize this so that the perpetrators are also deterred from making further actions after, I mean, they have been caught.
And I think to that point, if you start to think about legislation that exists elsewhere, the UK in particular, the Online Safety Act, that has been a big effort to try and regulate how some of the digital platforms safeguard young people and vulnerable people, and therefore try to define some of the guardrails in which the parameters in which they should do that. Um, Now we're at a point where we're trying to understand what implementation looks like for that act, but I think here it's almost a point of getting to a point where you have regulation in place, laws in place, which can then be enforced.
Yeah, I like to equate this to what happens in health. in terms of symptoms versus disease. You may take aspirin because you have temperature, but you're not curing the disease. You might be able to avoid it. So in some ways, if you go to the police, you might bring up a problem, but it might be in a complete different jurisdiction of the world. And so from a global perspective, uh, I think the solutions that we're looking are not there because we're not looking for them. Uh, this it's almost like if you need a special body that would be looking for protection of this global citizen, if you want, against situations like this. So it's not just the technology to correct the error, but rather how can we eliminate those that are producing the problem so that this doesn't keep happening uh, with people that do not have your own education or your resources, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a higher level of curing the disease, and of course the disease has to be identified, but there are multiple segments here, which could be with young kids, with adults, with all types of abuses. So it's not just one single one, but rather a family of potential crimes, perhaps.
Agreed. I think that's a really fundamental question here because we're talking about just one manifestation of abuse, but actually this is not the only manifestation of abuse, and perhaps when we go back to kind of harm prevention, some of that work is being done in the space in terms of domestic violence. Let's say, for example, domestic abuse, but perhaps we're not as well formed in the space of online how that manifests online, and therefore what we need to do to support those who are the perpetrators. Um, is there anything you'd like to comment on that one? No? Okay, excellent.
I actually have a follow-up to that, a related comment, and I'll stick with the health analogy for the moment. I think part of what I heard, if correct me if I'm wrong, Breeze, is that, again, using the health analogy, um, in very many cases, even the aspirin wasn't available in this situation, right? So it's not just that, not only was there not a cure for the disease, but there wasn't also a treatment for the symptoms of the disease, or at least those treatments weren't either readily available or applied all the time. So it sounds to me like the space that Alecto fits in, and technologies like that fit in right now, is in, at the very least, providing that treatment space so that we can at least minimize the impact. Would that be a sticking with the analogy? Would that be sort of an accurate reflection of what you're focused on?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So when this sort of things happens, like, we just really don't have any control of what the victims will do. Some of them, unfortunately, will take, like, take their own lives, and we need to, like, keep that in mind, that, like, how serious this problem is. But but at least the least we can do is to, like, try to control the situation, provide them with the mental health support, legal support, and the removal services that is, like, right now available. So this is what we can do. But obviously, when it comes to a cure, or even, like, like a vaccine solution, right? It still takes the whole system. And I do believe, I am hopeful. I do believe, like, technology can do really good things, but I think it takes all of us. It really takes a village.
And as a follow-up to that, I think, it was mentioned in the previous panel.
Sorry. One question online before we come back to the follow-up.
Oh, okay. It's directly related to this, so I didn't want to lose the thread.
Let's if you ask the follow-up, Mark, and then I'll come straight to you, Karen. Excellent.
Yeah, just because it's directly related. It was mentioned in the previous panel. One of the panelists mentioned, sort of a reminder to the audience that when we talk about law enforcement, that word enforcement is important because they're not in the law. They're not in the prevention space. They're in the enforcement space. So it kind of goes to the point here where the thing has already happened, and now you step in and fix it. So I wonder if, and I know we talked about policy a bit. I wonder if you've given any thought to what can be done pre situation to sort of prevent that situation from happening at all. And have you done any work with organizations to get to that root problem?
Yeah, so actually, I had a very interesting conversation with the FBI last Monday. So, I mean, I do believe they have like programs and they wanted to work with us to like, create like, prevention kind of like tools, like to make sure that people don't engage in some of that like crime. And some of that do include, education and like ethical hacking and all of that. But I mean, still, right now it's like very early stage. And yeah, I think we'll just leave it like that.
Yeah, I think we're talking about not just kind of online, we're talking about human behavior in general. And I think that's a whole bigger other conversation to be had. I'm gonna come to Karen online to ask her question.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's unfortunate about human behavior. And I just wanted to say, first of all, I think you're really, really brave. And I think it's amazing that you're standing up there talking about your experience and then to make a company and to do all that. I commend you completely. I think it's fantastic. But I also just wanted to ask you because y- your perpetrator, it's not it's really the case is it's not just one perpetrator, is it? Because when these things go online, they're then shared, so you've got multiple people sharing them. You've then got sites monetizing them, okay, or the ability to monetize them. So when you said it takes a village, it absolutely does. And this is, it's just to kind of like stretch that picture a bit more. It is a lot of people involved in this type of harm. Um, any ideas? Happy? How we do? I mean, I mean, it's just a very difficult situation.
Thank you, Karen. I think that's a really good point. I think that the essence of the question is when you've got multiple perpetrators, some with undue amounts of power, let's say, how do you even, we talk about chain of custody in law enforcement with evidence, how do you even start to follow that when it's online? It's an online footprint, there are multiple people all distributed geographically.
Yeah, so I mean, in my case, at least we know who the lead perpetrator is, and up until this point, I still haven't got justice. So I would love to have justice. I mean, after I've been fighting this for such a long time, and I do hope like someday justice will be available to me. And but I mean, yeah, to answer your questions, like there are probably like hundreds or thousands of other perpetrators also engaged in this, and also the platforms who are profiting from my abuse. I mean, we should hold them accountable as well. And I am doing that. That's why I sued Pornhub's parent company.
Thank you. Yes, 1 second. There's an order of questions. If you give me a second, can we go to Balaji and then Sophia, and then we'll come to the lady in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Breeze. Again, I absolutely agree with the previous speaker. You've been so brave to take this, despite the personal abuse you suffered, and then you've sort of taken this cost on behalf of others. My question is, see, there seem to be really, there are three parties here involved, if I can use that term, the person who's been abused, the abuser, and the intermediary who's actually, so I'm thinking of the whole demand side, because what you're trying to do is to sort of, there's the people who are unwittingly sort of made suppliers, if I may use that term in a very broad sense. Then how is it that we can, is it possible, through the legislations that you're doing? I mean, I just wanted you to explain a little more in terms of, what sorts of legislations are actually going to be effective, controlling the intermediary or at the end user or the end demand, where the end demand actually lies. Where do you think that actually, because in a sense, you're actually also walking perhaps the fine line with, people might invoke free speech and those sorts of expression and so on. So how exactly do we navigate this landscape?
So I'm just going to distill your question, Balaji, because it's quite complex. Because here we're talking about content online. Everyone puts their face online, and therefore that makes it accessible to perpetrators. But we're also talking about the I suppose the challenges around access and how easy it is for people to access that kind of deep fake technology. The previous panel talked about open source models being widely available. And to the very last point of your question is then how do you legislate what is essentially a bit of a free market when we're talking about generative AI and deep fake material. I hope that summarizes your question okay, Balaji. Yeah.
Stack. You have the intermediary and then the finance that the person like because why how long they can't get one like.
I'm sorry, yeah. This distinction between the person who's actually consuming it, I mean, if I'm watching that site, and the intermediary itself. So where exactly do we focus the legislation so that we minimize harm, even if we don't eliminate it completely in the future? Yeah.
Okay. Do you mean minimize harm for like people who don't know what they're consuming, or?
Who guys is victimized?
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I think so. First of all, I mean, I think you mentioned how do you define the line between free speech and hate speech, right? So I mean, in my case, I think it's pretty clear that it's very hateful, like it's terrorism against me, right? I mean, this is not a matter of like freedom of speech. So I mean, in certain cases, it's obvious. But I also wanted to also just to pick your brain a little bit. So I mean, when I decided to speak up and to talk about my story. So there's an interview I did with CBS News, and under the comment sessions, I mean, there's people saying she is not pretty. That is why I don't care. So would you say that's hate speech or free speech?
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a conversation in the room to that point. Is it free speech or hate speech?
Yeah, I mean, just
So having my cusp. Yeah, technically free speech. The question then is it ethical? Is it speech that should be platformed? I'm going to come to Sophia, then the lady in the middle. No, and then you'll be the last question. 4 more minutes. Okay, so we'll take these last 2 questions. Can I take them both together, if that's all right? If so, Sophia and then.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this is actually quite similar to Balaji's question, but I'm going to focus a little bit on the specifically generative AI software that actually makes it possible for people to create this kind of thing. And I'm wondering what you think the role of companies that provide this software to people is, and if there should be legislation limiting those companies from operating.
Thank you. So what the role is of companies who essentially provide the tools to create this type of material?
Going off of that. So as we talk about the kind of the line between like hate speech and free speech, then this becomes an issue of like, are we more worried about are we more worried about individual repercussions, like meaning like individual cases on it, like as in like the kind of revenge porn people that we know, or this becoming kind of like an institutional issue where kind of like framing this as everyone's at risk, and like you don't like someone you don't know could hypothetically like take photos off of like a public Instagram page and then create this kind of content about you.
Thank you. Interlinked. So what is the role of the organizations who provide the tools in order to create this type of material? And then also the second part of that question is really just is this a societal challenge? Is this at an individual level? And I think we probably all know the answer to that second question.
Okay, so that's a lot of questions. So definitely, I think the legislation, when we need to, when we create a legislation to address the systemic problem, you need to touch on all aspects. You need to consider the victims and the perpetrators' role, and also the platforms who's enabling this problem. And that's why I said we should really hold the platforms accountable. So when Nick Kristof wrote about my story, he actually specifically called out Google for enabling the proliferation of abusive content on their platform, and also I mean driving traffic to to deepfake tool websites and deepfake porn sites. So I mean that's something to consider. He also caught this this deepfake porn out as this. I mean, I think the term that he used is misogynist, which I mean, I believe it is quite accurate. So I mean, very deeply, we need to think about what is enabling this, in the society, and what is creating this problem. So we really need to cut very deep, and yeah. But I mean, what we can do now is to really get the platforms to really engage, and then to help address this problem that's really killing people, and we need to like take action quickly, not in a matter of like months or years. Like, now we need to take action now.
Thank you, Breeze. And I think you're an example of this is a problem that has affected you personally, but you've set out to create a solution for everyone, because essentially everyone is very much at risk. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you to everyone in the room for participating, and thank you to those online for participating and for your patience with all the tech issues earlier. But mostly, thank you very much, Breeze, for taking the time to fly over here to contribute, to share your story. I hope we've done it justice. I think really to close off that, the survivors of this type of abuse deserve compassion. They deserve dignity. They deserve to be treated with respect. And I think you're one of the people putting in the fundamental groundwork to ensure that those in future will be treated in that way. So thank you very much for your time and for your work. Yes, I'm on off to lunch. Thank you, everyone.